justifying equipment. We have an entirely new, an entirely different web seminar on prior use justification. So look at our schedule if you're interested in that as well. Welcome. I'm happy to see so many people signed up and logged in today. The status screen looks good except for one. Audio looks good. Feedback is coming through pretty well in our status board. My name is Bill Goble. I've been with Exida for 15 years. I've been in the safety business for about 30 years. And I will comment that it's not necessarily an easy business because this is complicated. And safety is important. I do remember a button I got at a show several years ago. It said SIS, safety is serious. I got it from a guy named Chuck Miller from Emerson, and I always appreciated the sentiment. If you are tuned in today, it's likely you are involved in safety instrumented systems design. And I just want to comment, this is serious business, and we hope our web seminars will help you do a better job. Exida is a global company with offices around the world. We have a collection of people from former manufacturing companies, former safety certification engineers, and a large group of instrumentation and control designers from chemical, petrochemical, offshore, and even nuclear companies around the world. And together we have different points of view, and I enjoy very much the arguments and the resulting conclusions from including all of these different points of view. Exida does a lot of methodology development. We figure out how to implement optimal life cycle, safety life cycle processes. We figure out how to do a better job designing and modeling safety systems. And we don't keep that information in a secret company document. We publish it in publicly available books because the nature of this game is safety, and we'd really like to help the world become a safer place. I consider IEC 61508 and the process industry specific version, IEC 61511, to be tremendously valuable documents. They were written during the late 90s, to the best of my memory. I do remember attending committee meetings in mid-90s through the late 90s. I remember attending many committee meetings in 1998, 1999, and the first versions of 61508 were published in 1998. The final versions in 2000, 61511 in 2003. These were tremendously valuable documents to all of us. These documents are founded on two fundamental principles. A safety life cycle, it's called, a detailed engineering process designed and created to eliminate or reduce design mistakes. Design mistake can cause a dangerous failure. These are called systematic faults. At the same time, we want to eliminate or reduce the chance of random failure, primarily hardware. And a probabilistic performance-based system design concept was adopted to make certain our designs are good enough for random failures. Different mechanisms protect us against systematic faults and failures. The standard deals with both of these fundamentally different kinds of problems, and it does an excellent job. This safety life cycle at the systems level is a series of steps for the entire life cycle, from analysis through maintenance and decommissioning. The purpose is to reduce design mistakes, increase safety, and lastly, and most important perhaps, to management at least, optimize cost. We have a whole web seminar on that subject too. Stay tuned. In the middle of the safety life cycle is a set of steps called SIF verification. And you, as a safety instrumented function designer, are free to design the system you want. But you must verify that your design meets the target SIL level. That's SIF verification. How do you do that? Well, there are 3 barriers. You must make sure all of your equipment has sufficient design quality. That's barrier number 1. Sufficient design quality. Now, how in the world would you understand, or how would you know if your equipment has sufficient design quality? That's a metric called systematic capability. And there are ways to do that, including auditing the design process and the testing and so forth. And that's the essence of what we're going to talk about today. Barrier number 2, we calculate probability of failure for the entire safety instrument and function. And barrier number 3, we look at specific architecture constraint limitations. And often minimum levels of redundancy are required based on barrier number 3. So we look at these 3 barriers, and a lot of people have spent a lot of time focusing on barrier number 2, calculate the PFD average or the PFH. Not as many people have spent much time worrying about barrier number 1 or barrier number 3, and we do have a web seminar on all 3 of these. Today we're going to focus on barrier number 1, systematic capability. One of the best ways, in fact, clearly the best way to evaluate systematic capability is to purchase equipment that has been evaluated for systematic capability by third-party accredited experts. And that is typically known as an IEC 61508 certification. Systems, products, components, software, and even personnel are getting certified today. The certification varies as a function of the type of product involved, but assessments are done against a set of requirements based primarily on international standards, including primarily IEC 61508. Most certifications are done by a CB, a certification body. And the certification body should establish a scheme which lists all the requirements for certification, both those in a standard and those added beyond the standards. Certification scheme. And the benefits of this is hardware. The actual hardware you will be purchasing is studied in detail to identify all possible dangerous failures. And in most cases, the design is changed or upgraded to eliminate or detect many of these dangerous failures. And failure rates are published as a function of failure mode to give you, at least in some certification bodies, really good quality data. And we'll be talking about that later. The architecture and the safety concepts of each design is reviewed and approved by top safety experts. The software design process is audited and assessed per the SIL level software engineering techniques to reduce software design errors. And that's a tough one. And lastly, documentation is created to help those who purchase a product properly design that product into a safety function. These are all things that are of great value to the systems level designer. And all of these things, if there is sufficient quality and integrity, indicate systematic capability. It's important that those who evaluate systematic capability be audited and accredited, or in effect certified. A different word is used, accredited. In addition, I mean, who gives you the right who gives an organization the right to issue a certificate? Typically, that's an accreditation body. In the United States, where exida operates the certification program, the accreditation body is ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and they will audit and accredit organizations, if they pass, to do certifications according to these highly technical standards. Companies that have an accreditation should confirm the accreditation by putting the AB logo on every certificate. I will admit, exida only started doing that recently after someone commented that we weren't, but that is an important thing, and we'll make sure all our certificates are upgraded shortly. I got a question. How often is the accreditation revalidated? The answer is every year. Although it feels like, I'll have to say that it feels like the ANSI auditors are coming in every 6 months. And that's primarily because exida is expanding its scope of operations. We now do cybersecurity and automotive and machine safety. And so we end up having the auditors in here quite often. But at least once a year. Thanks for the question. Clear that so I'll note. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Look for the accreditation body logo on each certificate because it's important. Why? Some organizations, even though they are accredited, do not operate under the accredited procedures. I asked them once, why? That's too much work. Oh my goodness. I find that inconceivable. And so we call those a house certificate. Another question. There are now many TUV certifications, people and equipment. Are they reliable? I probably should not comment on that because I may not have the proper level of impartiality. Impartiality is a term we use in the certification business because you must realize the TUV companies are our competitors. I will comment that I feel many of their electronic and software certifications are quite competent, are quite well done. Oh, and I should most certainly mention that there are 3 different TUV organizations doing certifications. I have reviewed and audited certifications from all 3, and I find TÜV Süd and TÜV Nord to be, I find the people to be very competent. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks for asking. Look for the accreditation body logo on the certificates. Every certification body should have an advisory board. This is a group of people who reviews the requirements, the operation, and problems in a certification body. exida has an advisory board, and we use them to help review the requirements we use, to add new requirements, and to deal with complaints and problems of a serious nature. Our advisory board is primarily made up of end users and manufacturers from the process industry and machine safety industries. We meet 3 times a year. We do every quarter except the summer. We take the summer off. The advisory board has established a certification scheme for exida, which goes beyond IEC 61508. In other words, people from engineering companies, from process industries, and from product manufacturers said the world needs a tougher program. And what we've added beyond 61508 is a detailed FMEDA analysis. And I'll be talking a little bit about what this is because we think it's quite valuable. We analyze and publish not only the dangerous failure rates, like some CBs do, but also the false trip data. I don't know about you, but I've been told by many in the process industries that a false trip is a really big deal. And it's just as important to analyze and evaluate false trip. It's not enough to just publish a PFD number. We must calculate and verify false trip as well. And it can be done. Those who say it can't be done simply don't know how to do it. We evaluate product maintainability. We evaluate design complexity. And the more complex the design, the deeper you dig in order to verify systematic capability. Exida demands that a practical proof test be created by the designer of a product, at least the outline for a proof test. There are many products on the market that are simply not proof testable, believe it or not. And Exida does surveillance audits and publishes expiration dates on our certificates. I will say that has been copied by other CBs since we started doing it, but that's a good form of compliment. How's it work? Many pressure transmitters have now been certified by Exida certification. We review the detailed product development process, make sure it meets the required SIL level. We do an FMEDA analysis. Most of the time, that results in manufacturers adding features to the product to make sure data is properly protected in the memory, and adding features to detect program execution problems, and adding automatic diagnostics. Adding. What's the bottom line here? You get a much better product, a much safer product, and a product that is hopefully has, well, all indications are has fewer design defects. And user manuals were created to make sure you have the information you need to properly design. We need to protect against random failures and systematic failures. Please do not hesitate to look at the Safety Automation Equipment list, where all of these certifications are published. Certification concept applies to simple mechanical devices as well, with, for example, a solenoid valve. We do something very similar. The IEC 61508 standard clearly applies. You establish a hardware development process that meets SIL 3 requirements. We demonstrate test results, make certain they are properly testing to verify the design was done properly. We make certain the user manual has all the information needed for safety design, and we do a detailed failure mode effect and diagnostic analysis. We cover both systematic and random failures. And if you look on the Safety Automation Equipment list, which is on the Exida website, you will see a large number of manufacturers now have certified solenoid valves. Even more complicated mechanical devices like actuators and valves follow a similar process, covering both systematic and random failures. Of course, the whole certification process started with logic solvers. I see a question popped up. This is a good one. Is there a motor interrupt function available with SIL certification? It is a question Exida has been asked before, and I'm so glad you are asking. At this moment, I do not know of any motor interrupt function, final element, a motor contact, or quote, motor controller that is SIL certified. I will tell you that Exida has contacted several manufacturers, and they've all they've all told us, end users don't want certified motor controllers. So we're not going to do it. I guess the bottom line is, if end users want certified motor interrupt controllers, you need to tell the manufacturers to get their products certified. Good luck. I'll be glad to help in any way I can. And if you have any names of people I should contact, please send them to me. And thanks very much for the question. It is relevant. It does seem to be a hole in the certification scheme. Logic solvers are where all this started, and of course these are probably pretty complex devices, and maybe the most complex devices in our safety instrumented functions. SIL capability is so important here because of the complexity of these devices. Accreditation has done almost half the logic solver certifications in the world. And we've done the same thing that we do on everything else. We study their design processes. We study their testing procedures and their testing results and look for any lack of proper process. We do FMEDA analysis with extensive fault injection testing to verify the diagnostics, and detailed field failure studies of the existing design or prior designs. And the logic solver manufacturers create good documentation, again, doing all that we can to protect against systematic and random failures. Manufacturers who get their products certified have to do a lot of things. And we check. They have to have a documented life cycle for safety. That means detailed, documented procedures for how to design and test their products, including software. They have to have requirements, detailed written requirements. It's not enough to have it in the head of the chief designer. They need a detailed safety-related test validation plan, we call it. They have to have a defined architecture and design documents. They have to qualify their tools, even their mechanical design tools. I have so many stories about problems based on looking at thousands and thousands of field failures. Some of them are caused by the design tools. They have to have a software coding standard and a documented descriptions of all the compilers and software development tools they use. They have to follow these development procedures and have evidence that they are really following their procedures. And they need to verify compliance to all their various coding standards and procedures. At Accreditation, we have a pretty extensive certification process, which is typically more detailed than others, because our advisory board wants a scheme that's tougher. The Accreditation certification process has a lot of details in it. You can see we analyze the hardware, we analyze the software, we provide training to the people to make sure they understand how important safety is. We analyze communication protocols, and we create what's known as a safety case where we identify potential problems. You can look at all the evidence documents that we require. Requirements, functional safety management plan, validation test plan, tool justification, software process documents, coding standards, module test plans, module integration plans, and a safety manual. We have to have a detailed failure mode and effects analysis, a detailed failure mode effect and diagnostic analysis, a fault injection test to make sure the FMEDA is validated, the software HAZOP report, and communication safety. These are all the things we need to really do a pretty good job on a smart product. Now, obviously, there are many things that are not as involved in simple type A or simple mechanical devices. There's no software in a solenoid valve, and nor do we have to check for that. But everything else still applies. And that's how you establish systematic capability, even for a simple mechanical device. More questions are welcomed at any time. Comments or challenges are also welcomed. I talked about this FMEDA. It's a process developed by engineers at Exida. Using a component database, we look at each and every part. For example, what happens when this capacitor fails short circuit? What happens when this capacitor fails open circuit? What happens when the input circuit to this integrated circuit fails open, short, or leakage? What happens when this resistor drifts and changes value? We look at every single component and every failure mode of every component. And you have to ask the question, how does this impact the product? Does the product fail? Does it fail safe? Does it fail dangerously? Is the failure detected by any automatic diagnostic? And that all has to be documented with thousands of lines in the analysis. The question was, are they considered random failures? All of the things I just talked about, these capacitors, resistors, and integrated circuits, are most certainly considered random failures. Most hardware failures, even resistor drift, will likely cause failure of a product. But that is a question we ask during the detailed failure mode and effect analysis. It's very detailed, it's very tedious, and quite frankly, it can be boring, but it's effective. And when we're all done, we generate both false trip failure rates and dangerous failure rates, and we can identify failures that are detected by automatic diagnostics and those that aren't. We also identify the useful life of the product based on the useful life of the components. There's unbelievably valuable information that comes out of an FMEDA. But like any method, there is a potential problem. The accuracy of the FMEDA depends on the accuracy of the component database. You've heard the term garbage in, garbage out. FMEDA process itself is not foolproof and must have a good database. Another question. Thank you, David. Systematic failure mode, looking at manufacturer's process. Yes, the process analysis is looking for systematic failures of the manufacturer. It's not just the process, the defined process, following the defined process, and testing. Testing is a big part of identifying and mitigating systematic failures in the manufacturer's development process. But the safety life cycle concept, and that translate to the procedures used to design and test a product, are what we look at to identify and, of course, require that manufacturers fix design systematic failures, design mistakes. Well, if this component database is so important, how do you get a good component database? And the answer is in any reliability engineering context. You must understand the parameters that affect and might create the failures of the components, and you must have good field failure data. At Exida, we've studied hundreds and hundreds of field failure sets of data from both end users and manufacturers. And at this point, we've accumulated history of over 100 billion unit operating hours. I have been to several conferences on data collection and analysis, and based on what I've heard at these conferences, I'm pretty confident. Exida has more field failure rate data than anyone in the world. We aggregate that data, we constantly compare the results against different databases, and we use those results the collection of many sets of failure data results to update the exida component failure database. We published that database, and we received comments and feedback from experts all over the world. Some of the feedback we get is that some failure rate numbers being published are, quote, wildly optimistic. And what do we do when we see these wildly optimistic numbers? One particular engineer wrote us an email that said, I have attached the exida FMEDA numbers for this X product. Exida certified the product, but I see the exida certification has expired. And the vendor chose to sign up with a TÜV agency, and they published numbers on the same product, and they were 40 times lower. This is not good. So you have to be very careful about where the failure rate data comes from. How do you do that? Well, at Exida, we constantly compare. Constantly compare. Here's one of those results. We took some FMEDA results for a simple solenoid valve and a spool type solenoid valve, and we compared it to the field failure results published by Dow. And the fact is, the Dow number, represented by this gray dot, is right in the middle of the Exida numbers. Exida engineers traveled to Dow on several occasions and reviewed their data analysis method with them, and they explained that they combine all different kinds of solenoid valves into one number. Take the average of the Exida numbers, and it kind of matches the Dow number right on the money. That's a really good match. ORITA numbers are sitting at a higher rate, but we also traveled to a technical conference in Norway and discovered the ORITA includes what we call site-specific failures, and roughly the site-specific failures represent half. So if I take the ORITA number, divide by 2, it also matches with the Exida FMEDA, which includes the product failure rate numbers. However, some of the manufacturer's warranty data and cycle test results create numbers that are extremely optimistic, so you have to be very careful about those, even though they're published by a certification body. Here's a copy of a certificate with an unknown data method for a Scotch yoke spring return pneumatic actuator. And they've got the dangerous failure rate at roughly 3.5 e to the minus 8. And we sat down and compared that. I've got 4, when you add the numbers up, 412 e to the minus 8. 412 e to the minus 8 is the dangerous failure rate. Exida FMEDAs are coming in at between 4.29 e to the minus 7 and 6. You know, the Exida numbers are about 10 times higher. Oh, this is not good. Why is that? Well, where's the Dow number? 2 e to the minus 7. All right, Exida seems to be a little pessimistic compared to the Dow. The Nomura number is a pretty good match with Exida. The ORITA number, if we divide by 2, is almost a perfect match to the Exida numbers. If anything, the Exida numbers are a little high. But some of these numbers, apparently based on manufacturer's warranty data, these are way, way optimistic. Now, the problem with that is if you use these kind of numbers, you'll be designing dangerously. Oh, I see another question. Sorry, I might have missed it. The question is, how does the component database used in the electrical and mechanical handbook compare with field failure results? That's exactly what we're doing right now. Thank you so much for asking that question. The Electrical and Mechanical Component Handbook is used to generate the FMEDAs. So these numbers, 4.83 and 1.36 e to the minus 6, represent the numbers from the component handbook. Third edition is the latest. We'll be publishing a fourth edition this fall. And we've gathered up another few billion hours of field failure data since the last book was published. These numbers that come from the Electrical and Mechanical Handbook match up pretty nicely with Dow and match up pretty nicely with Orita divided by 2 and match up pretty nicely with Nimor. And this gives one confidence that the numbers in the component handbook are finally getting. We've done research now for 15 years. I've been doing failure rate research for about 25 years. I have sets of data that go back 20 years. That's not that relevant for mechanic, but for electronic, but some of the mechanical stuff is still valid. This is looking pretty good. We're very comfortable with the failure rate numbers we are publishing now. And it does remind me that an FMEDA really needs to be kept up to date based on manufacturer's design changes and new failure data information. And so make sure your FMEDA data is no older than 3 years. That's the rule I use. Completeness is an important part of systematic capability, and Exida uses a safety case concept for that. All the requirements are listed in a document for every single requirement in the Exida scheme, including those from 61508 and the additional requirements Exida has imposed based on our advisory board. We write down an argument how a particular design meets the requirement. Every argument must be backed up by evidence, a process document, a test procedure, field failure history, fault injection test results. So we analyze. We do bench analysis. We do testing. We evaluate the design process and the manufacturer's testing and the field failure rates of either the existing equipment or prior generations. And all of that is put together in a package called a safety case. I remember reading a paper about this written by out of the United Kingdom. To the best of my knowledge, that's where the safety case concept was created. And it's a valuable concept to ensure thorough, complete assessment. I'm happy that Exida has so much experience in the certification business. Exida was co-founded by a former TUV manager who helped start the entire functional safety program concept. And we have many former TUV engineers on our staff. Many of the top people joined Exida when we started up in our early years, and we've used that experience to build what we think is the strongest program in the world. We're active on the committees for both cybersecurity and for functional safety, and we helped develop and write many of the standards. I see this particular list is a bit out of date. I think the number's better right now, but Exida has done more 61508 certifications for the process industries than any certification body in the world. And I think that's because we have a good value. Another question. Thank you so much. If I have a SIF, which is SIL 1, but my sensor is not certified, what do I do? Well, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I recommend you go ask the sensor manufacturer if they're in the process of getting a certification. I can tell you that exida has 64 active certification projects going on right now. Now, not all of these people will succeed. Some of them fail. 61508 certification is not easy, although I will admit SIL 1 is much easier than SIL 2, which is easier than SIL 3. But if they're about to get the product certified, that's good. If they're not, your choice is get a certified product, or as a more practical matter, you can do your own prior use justification. That is a provision in 61511. It's absolutely allowed. In effect, you are taking the responsibility to evaluate the systematic capability of your sensor. And if you have the means and the ability to do that, it usually involves manufacturer quality audits, and we have a whole web seminar on how to do that. So stay tuned. I could probably get that scheduled even earlier than it might be right now. You can, the answer to your question, what do I do? You have to do your own prior use justification. Another question. Thanks very much. SIL verification on the same lines. SIL verification is done on platform revamp jobs. Systematic capability is generally missing. Yeah, I found that when we have audited companies. That is a requirement of 61511, except it didn't get much publicity until a few years ago. SIL capability is generally missing, and we can ignore, the SC and Excellentia. Exida has a tool called Excellentia for SIL verification, and we do allow people to turn that off. The reason for that is some customers are still using the original ISA SP84 from 1996, which did not have systematic capability. That's why we allow you to turn it off. However, I don't know, maybe we don't need to do that anymore, but right now you can turn it off, and it's your choice. In terms of compliance, what are the risks of non-compliance? If, for example, if exida were asked to do a 61511 compliance audit, and we check the SIL verification, we will check to make sure that all three barriers are documented. Systematic capability, number one. PFD calculations, or PFH, barrier number two. And architecture constraints, barrier number three. We would issue a report that the design was not compliant with 61511. If that is in your contract, we have had companies that, oh, what a mess. I can think of a job when the main contractor was required to rip out all of the non-certified devices and replace them before the project would be paid. That's a pretty significant consequence, and a major delay. Loss of production was horrendous. The lost opportunity cost was horrendous. On the other hand, if the purchasing person will waive that requirement, end of discussion. So there is economic risk. In terms of reality, the bottom line is if you have chosen a highly reliable product, it will work well for you. Just because a product isn't certified doesn't mean it isn't good. It just means it hasn't had a third-party audit. And I don't mean to claim that a product is no good unless it's certified. It's a bit of a tough one, though. Depending on the situation, it could be rough. But remember, and I will never tell you that every product has to be certified. I'll repeat again, 61511 does allow prior use justification, but you have to take responsibility for that justification. And most importantly, you need to document it. I appreciate your questions very much. I hope you get some concept of the benefits of purchasing a certified product when you have a choice. You have a third-party expert who thoroughly understands what it takes to design a product with few design mistakes. At Exida, we have experts in mechanical design, software design, electronic design, microcomputer design, and even integrated circuit design. And the key is you go out and evaluate these processes, and you can tell when someone's doing a good job and when they aren't. You can tell when they're designing properly or not. And if they're not, they don't get certified by Exida. It's as simple as that. That means you have a good opportunity to have high systematic capability. And perhaps more importantly, in the long run, you have a good chance of having a product that will run very reliably for you, provide the safety you need, and avoid false trips. In the end, that's really what we're all about. All of us are just trying to design equipment that is safe, does not cause a false trip, and is economically optimized. Got another question. Thanks so much. Is there a difference between prior use and proven in use? To the best of my knowledge, one term is used in 61508. The other term is used in 61511. Since they're not well defined in either case, it's my opinion that there is no difference. So I have seen the new version of 61511, and they've done a better job defining what it takes for prior use justification. There's also an Exida web seminar on the subject, and I've seen documents from various government and regulatory agencies from around the world with their particular requirements. As we move forward, I would hope the standards do a better and better job defining exactly what that takes. Thanks for asking. All right, I hope you see the benefits of the certification, and obviously I hope you get some insight into the Exida certification program. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to ask. Oh, another one. Thank you so much. In regard to architecture constraints, I've seen many SIL-3 applications that use 2 out of 3 sensors with appropriate logic solver and 2 valves. On a 2 out of 2 D and 2 valves on an ASCO 2 out of D can make architecture constraints, in particular the final element design. I didn't get enough information here to really answer your question, but it sounds like you have a design with a hardware fault tolerance of 1, assuming the 2 valves are piped up so that only 1 valve has to work to implement the safety function. On the ASCO 2 out of 2D, I assume you have 1 per valve, and of course that does a fine job on exercising the valve, which actually lowers some of the dangerous failure rates, and does a good job at detecting when a valve has failed dangerously. And in a situation where 2 valves exist, that's a complete HFT equals 1 design, and so it would meet many of the architecture constraint tables, especially the new one from 61508-2010 called Route 2H, which I think is the most practical and useful table of all. And so it sounds like that design, based on what you said, would indeed meet SIL-3 architecture constraint requirements. there are some issues there, and that's why the 2H table is so valuable. I'm so glad the committee put that in. All right, I thank you all very much. Do not hesitate to send an email. This program has been recorded, and you can watch it again on both the exida website, and it's likely that it will be available on YouTube soon. Thanks very much for attending, and please stay tuned for the exida Wednesday web seminars. Thank you, and goodbye.